I have the pleasure of introducing to you Mike Kelly, who, as I said before, is the repository for all protocol information and is probably your single first stop for any problem that you might have related to any Alliance protocol, including how to work electronic devices. Which one is yours now? Tell me I loaded it up.
Yeah, try that one.
Thank you.
I don't know that I could live up to that building. I will tell you that 22 years is insufficient to learn everything there might be to know about clinical trials. I sort of drew the short straw and volunteered for the following acronyms that you see on the screen, which are sort of like the home of, or the island of misfit acronyms. So we'll try to piece a little bit of what other speakers have mentioned and try to provide a little bit more detail, but this is just a broad overview. And I think that the message that will come through at the very end is that there are people that work either on the AFT side or in the Alliance Central Protocol Operations Program or in the Alliance Stats and Data Center who know what you need, know how to get what you need. If they don't know, they know the right person to put you in contact with. So the presentation objectives are just simply to understand some of the NCI and CTSU infrastructure, services, and policies supporting you as a study chair, your clinical trial, and all NCI clinical trials. We'll touch base on an acronym known as OEWG, the cIRB, the CTSU, and RSS. So the NCI Operational Efficiency Working Group was convened by the NCI and was made up in 2009 of approximately 10 of the group chairs of the legacy cooperative groups that Monica had mentioned. 8 cancer center directors, numerous investigators, statisticians, protocol specialists, community oncologists, patient advocates, NCI clinical trial staff, and representatives from the FDA and the CMMS. And their goal was to identify institutional barriers to prolonging time from when a concept was first conceived to the accrual of the first patient. And they established a working group to recommend strategies to develop plans to reduce the time to activation of group and cancer center trials. And it was launched as a working group in 2009. It was announced as a program in 2010, and it was implemented for all NCI CTEP-sponsored or NCTN today trials in 2011. So the data that the NCI looked at when it looked at their phase 3 trials from 2006 to 2008 was that most of their trials, 60% of their trials, took more than 2 years from the point where the concept was reviewed to the trial was activated. And a smaller portion took 1 to 2 years. But the consensus was, if it's taking you more than 2 years from the point where you conceive a scientific medical idea to the point where you're activating the trial, you haven't even enrolled your very first patient, that there's a good chance that your idea is stale, science has passed you by, and you will not successfully complete your protocol. So the median days to the various stages of NCI clinical trial activations are on the right-hand side. It took the NCI approximately 90 days to review a trial and approve a trial. It took approximately 140 days, or a little more than 3 months, for the concept to be approved and the starting gun to go off and the operations group to start developing your clinical trial and to get a first draft to the NCI. Then things bogged down. It took about another year for your trial to make it through the gauntlet for approval before it could be activated. That was unacceptable to investigators, patients, pharma collaborators. And so what the NCI proposed to do, in blue, you see, are the times, the intervals that we mentioned on the previous slide. What they proposed across the board for CTEP-sponsored trials was a drastic reduction in the amount of time that it took investigators to get concepts from protocol to protocol approval to first patient on. So the most of the drastic reduction occurred on the behalf of the time of the investigator working with the NCI in order to get the trial activated, developed and activated. So the NCI developed target timelines for all clinical trials. And for phase 3 studies, their ideal timeline is a target activation from the point of concept review to completion of protocol development is 300 days. So devoting about 30 days, this is for phase 2s, devoting for about 30, no, phase 3s, I take that back. 30 days for concept review and a cycle of revisions back and forth to the investigator. Another 90 days for protocol development. That is from the point where you get concept approval to a protocol approval. I take it back. 90 days to get your protocol back to the NCI. 30 days for the NCI to review it, and then approximately another 90 days for a cycle of revisions from the protocol and forms development and everything that you need to do in order to get a trial up and running. And everybody needs deadlines. Nothing would occur without them. So the NCI indicated that if after 2 years your trial had not been activated, then they would cease development of the trial and you would not be allowed to move forward with it. The trial would be dead. So for phase 3 concepts, for CTEP-sponsored studies, not NCORE, not DCP-sponsored trials, the target timeline that the NCI recommends is 300 days to get your trial from concept to protocol approval ready for the very first patient. If it is not ready for the first patient by 540 days, the trial is over. Another opportunity slot moves on for another drug, another regimen, and science marches on. And the concept approval stage is about 90 days. The protocol authoring stage is about 90 days. The protocol approval and open to patient enrollment is about 120 days. For phase 2s, it's faster. I don't know why it's faster. It's the same amount of work. In most instances, randomized phase 2s are just as complicated as phase 3 trials, but there it is. 60 days to get the concept approved, 60 days to author the trial, and then 90 days to get the trial up and running. Phase 1 and phase 2 are the same. So Alliance protocol development is quick. It is focused and concentrated and front-loaded. And so your attention and the attention of your co-chairs and the attention of your statisticians and your correlative co-chairs or your health outcomes colleagues needs to be upfront and invested so we can get a draft of the protocol, a mature draft of the protocol to the NCI and get it approved so that other things can be occur as well. Case report form development and IRB approval. So NCI OEWG timelines drive protocol and forms development and protocol activation. And underscoring something that Monica initially started with and that Jeannie emphasized, it takes a village. It is incredibly complex today. It involves multidisciplinary co-chairs, biostatisticians, nurses, as Pat and Patty indicated as well, patient advocates, protocol coordinators, forms developers, IT staff, and always at the center, an Alliance executive officer, both on the NCI, NCTN side, on the NCI NCORE side and also on the Alliance AFT side. One of the most important takeaways is Alliance protocol coordinators and executive officers can help navigate the Alliance and NCI processes, get to know them, heed their guidance. Part of the requirements for the OEWG are that not only do you have to have a protocol that has been reviewed and approved by the NCI, not only do you have to have case report forms that have been reviewed and are ready for the first patient to be enrolled on the day that we activate the trial, but that 540 days for a phase 3 trial also includes review by one of the NCI central IRBs. So not just protocol activity and science writing, not just case report form development, but also regulatory review by the NCI cIRB. And the NCI cIRBs provide expedited reviews that are oncology-specific, multidisciplinary boards dedicated to an initial review, approving local context considerations for your model consent document. They perform amendment review, and the goal is to open trials faster, especially for rare diseases. You, as an investigator, do not have to worry about interacting with 50 IRBs who contest or challenge the way you've written your consent form and would prefer to word it in a different way. You deal with one IRB, and they perform all of the work. So for investigators and for research staff, it eliminates protocol round trips to local IRBs. It eliminates the need for amendment reviews, continuing renewals, and adverse events. And the goal really was to eliminate and reduce effort on the time of staff locally, get your trial up and running so that when the Alliance activates your trial, we are ready for your very first patient the day that we activate your trial. So there are 4 cIRBs. There's an early phase, phase 1, 2. There's a late phase, phase 3, 2, 3. There's a newly formed cancer prevention and control cIRB, and a pediatric cIRB. And as I said previously, the OEWG timelines include cIRB review. So, got to write the protocol quickly, develop the case report forms, front-loaded so that all of the review processes and approvals can take place in the amount of time that OEWG allots to us. OEWG drives everything that we do. There is another service that the NCI provides to investigators and to institutions, and this is the Cancer Trial Support Unit, or acronym 3, CTSU. So CTSU means different things to different people. It does different things, and we'll go through those. But the idea is that it facilitates and harmonizes trial activities across all of the groups so that when you are an investigator enrolling a patient on a SWOG-coordinated trial from an Alliance institution, you're using the same registration system that you use if you were an Alliance investigator enrolling on an Alliance trial. So the goal is to streamline clinical trial processes. And it is a website, but it is much more than a website. And Grace Mishkin mentioned it this morning in her discussion. So encourage you to go to ctsu.org, poke around. What you will find is access to not only Alliance trials, but SWOG trials, to NRG trials, to ECOG Akron trials, to CCTG trials, to NCORE trials. You will find them there. So the CTSU website will give you protocol documentation. So the protocol, CRFs, the study funding sheet that was discussed earlier this morning, the national coverage analysis, all these things that you need in order to get your trial or someone else's trial up and running at your institution quickly. The CTSU website also has a regulatory portal submission so that your site and your site's regulatory staff can easily upload any IRB information to the RSS system, which we'll talk about just below. The other service that the CTSU provides is this OPEN, Oncology Patient Enrollment Network, acronym number 4. It's a web-based 24/7 registration system, which again, across all of the NCI, NCTN trials, all of the NCORE trials, is used commonly. The regulatory support system is one of those applications that Monica also mentioned earlier this morning that is behind the scenes. You probably won't interact with it very much, but the operations staff rely on it. Why? Because as an investigator, you're rostered there. All the investigators are rostered there. Your institution and your institutional affiliation, whether you belong to SWOG or NRG, is logged there. All of the IRB information or protocol-specific requirements that a study may have. Fran Laurie mentioned credentialing. So if your protocol that you're developing requires there to be standardized CT acquisition, there is a credentialing process for that. That is coordinated by IROC. If you meet the criteria, they flag it and they indicate it in the regulatory support system, and these systems talk to one another so that when you go to enroll a patient on a trial and there's a protocol-specific requirement for radiation credentialing, the RSS system has the protocol in it. It knows who you are. It knows the institution that you're at. It has the protocol-specific requirements, and if you're trying to enroll a patient on the trial and you don't have the cooperative group affiliation that you say you do, it will stop you from enrolling. If your institution hasn't met the radiation requirement or any other requirement that may be specified in the protocol, it will stop you from enrolling. So these systems are designed, again, they're behind the scenes. You probably won't interact with them, but staff members will be setting your trials up in order to facilitate their conduct and to ensure that only investigators, only institutions with the criteria that you've specified in your protocol can enroll patients on your trial. So these web-based applications for IRB approvals, protocol-specific requirements, checking investigators, checking institutions. The CTSU systems are designed to alleviate institution burden, and again, protocol coordinators and executive officers work with and in these systems every day. They understand the CTSU system interactions, consult, and rely on them. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. I'll be here through Saturday. Jeannie's presentation identified the protocol coordinators that are in the Alliance Central Protocol Operations Program. They are disease experts. They do know the systems. They do know the processes. They can help Sherpa you through the process of getting your trial activated, the process of conducting your trial, and reaching a successful conclusion. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeannie.
Don't start yet. Go.
All right, so we're all good. So exactly, so I was an executive officer of the Alliance until about a month ago. So I was going to just kind of, my two parts of my talk was just kind of describe what the activities of what the executive officer does, how they can help you during your study development, and then kind of put some real-world examples to these funding and budget considerations that happen during trial development. So as the case, all executive officers are a physician with oncology expertise, and our main job is we are the bridge between the scientific team, so your study chair, this committee chair, as well as the Alliance operation team. And it is our charge to make sure that your concept gets executed and the study is completed successfully. And in that, we kind of help shepherd your protocol through the NCI's regulatory processes, work with our budgets and contracts team in order to successfully negotiate a budget and get your study funded, and then also help troubleshoot any issues that come along with your study as it is enrolling patients. And so kind of specifically during study development, we work very closely with the protocol team to review the protocol. We are in the protocol office at least 2 days a week. And so a lot of times a protocol coordinator can come to us and say, hey, listen, does this eligibility criteria look right? Does this study calendar look right? And we can kind of answer those questions since we are all physicians. And so to kind of decrease the back and forth on email with the study chairs and the protocol coordinators. Specifically, we take a very close eye. We're looking at eligibility criteria. Eligibility criteria that worked at your own institution study may not be appropriate or translatable into a national cooperative group study. And so we'll often maybe make revisions that will kind of help you augment your accrual. The study schema, the treatment section, as well as looking at dose modifications, because we want dose modifications to be consistent for like Pembro for all alliance studies that are using Pembro, and the same thing for all maybe lung studies that are using a carboplatin. We would like the dose modifications to be consistent across the board. We also help coordinate the pieces. So many studies may have pathology. It may require real-time pathology review or radiology, real-time radiology review. And so we kind of help the study team. We put you in contact with the people either in our translational research program, in our IROC, to kind of make these things happen and to acquire the funding necessary to have them happen. And then in terms of funding and contracts, you know, we often turn to pharma, or for maybe integral or integrated biomarkers, there will be an application process for what we call BISQUIC funds through the NIH. And so we are kind of one of the people who are kind of have the scientific oversight of creating your budget of the things that you need for your study. And I think it's really important to remember that study chairs are not authorized on behalf of the Alliance to negotiate a budget. And it could be even a casual conversation. During my time as a study chair, as an executive officer, I've seen study chairs email with pharmaceutical companies, oh, we only need your drug, patients will only stay on your drug for maybe 2 years. And that gets written in stone. And actually, maybe the patients were doing really well and they needed the drug for much longer. So all these types of things that are negotiation points about maybe imaging things or pathology, you know, they require a budget line item. They really should be negotiated by the budgets and contracts team and have the executive officer involved in that loop. While a study is active in enrolling patients, we assist in reviewing the amendments that happen. All studies get amended at least twice a year, it seems like. And so we'll also help troubleshoot issues that go along with the protocol. Maybe a protocol needs accrual enhancement. And so that is where we kind of engage the study team to say maybe what can be changed about the protocol. Maybe we need to engage our advocacy group to help develop materials. Maybe we need to kind of have more site outreach with webinars, or have you contact the sites, or have you mobilize sites that have been great accruers in the past. So those are the types of activities that that executive officer can help the study chair with. We can often, when your study opens, there are a lot of queries from the sites. A lot of them go through the protocol coordinator who can answer a good chunk of them. Many of them require some sort of scientific knowledge, and so a lot of those will go to you, but sometimes if a site needs something answered in a quick time frame, the executive officer can answer that, because the study chair may be traveling or something like that. So it's always important that if you are traveling and you are a study chair, you need to think of who's going to back you up if you're not going to be online to answer site queries. You can go to your committee chair, you could also go to the executive officer, but please be mindful of that. We also serve as a person who can authorize emergency unblinding for placebo-controlled studies. This doesn't happen very often, and generally the answer is always no. We do not unblind patients for a placebo-controlled study unless it is a medical emergency. That knowledge of the treatment arm really depends on the patient's immediate medical management. But all of these requests must go through an executive officer, and the executive officer is the only person who's authorized to make the decision to unblind the patient. And there is a special protocol that happens with that, and if this is one of your studies, you'll realize how that is done. When a study is closed, there's still work for the executive officer to be done. So, you know, when the DSM maybe comes up with an announcement that the study needs to to stop due to it passes a futility or or actually it kind of had great results. It is kind of the study chair is notified of this, but as the executive officer, along with our colleagues in the Alliance Operations Office, that kind of rally the troops to figure out what to be done. We need to notify cIRB. We may need to notify a pharmaceutical company. We may need to make a decision if patients that are unblinded and those who were on the placebo control arm, should they be crossed over and receive the treatment. And we also need to coordinate, a notification of site and patients. So this is kind of an activity that every time post one of our group meetings that the following couple days, the executive officer is typically busy with. And then rarely, we do have a lot of post-study activity. So recently, one of our renal cell cancer studies, our CABO-SUN study, was a positive study showing that cabozantinib had superiority over sunitinib. That study was not planned to be a registration study, and it was initially not funded by the pharmaceutical company. But due to the positive results, the pharmaceutical company was very interested in getting the data, collecting scans retrospectively for a blinded review, and actually in the process of submitting this to the FDA. And so it was the executive officer who, along with the Alliance team, that spent many hours with the pharmaceutical company and with negotiating all these aspects, getting the sites to submit their images, which they had not planned to do initially. And then also, even the study's done, you may have samples, you may want to share your data, and so the executive officer is a great person to go to for those funding considerations as well as logistics. So in general, feel free to reach out to your executive officer. Our goal is to make your study a success, and to kind of support the scientific vision of the committee. And I think, as you all know, as studies are becoming more and more complex, even the most scientifically brilliant idea or great study needs to have the support to support the logistics, and it cannot work out if the logistics are not carefully planned and managed and funded. So kind of a next part, I just wanted to hear a lot about budgeting, the funding sheets, the Medicare coverage analysis. How does that really work in the real world when we're planning studies? So one example is in the next quarter, we will be opening the Ambassador study, which is an adjuvant study in urothelial carcinoma, pembro versus observation. And for this study, there needs to be PD-L1 testing in order for stratification, because if the patient's positive or negative, that's the stratification factor. And so because of the nature of the testing is used for stratification, or if this was going to be like an eligibility criteria for the study, this is an integral biomarker. It needs to be funded. So the executive officer is involved in how do we get funding for this critical piece. Do we get it from the pharmaceutical company, or is it something that we can apply for the BISQUIC funds? And both of those kind of require a good bit of work on the Alliance team. Initially, the study was designed and submitted to cIRB as a placebo-controlled study. And then during its approval, it became clear that the pharmaceutical company wasn't producing the placebo, and it needed to be an observation study. And so that kind of, we got questions of initially the schema was having the patients come back every 3 weeks. For our adjuvant population, getting pembro, that's okay. For patients that are just being observed, that is not feasible or doable. And so it required us kind of going back and really kind of relooking at the schema, the fine-tooth comb, to how we had balanced these two arms. Another thing that came up was kind of looking at the interval restaging exams. Disease-free survival was a co-primary endpoint. And our stats team, as well as the FDA, wanted scans to be done at a more frequent basis than what NCCN says you can do it. So they wanted scans to be done quarterly for a couple of years and then every 6 months. And so sometimes you can, the responses be like, oh, well, we will see if insurance will pay for it, and if insurance doesn't pay for it, we'll gather pharmaceutical funds to pay for those excess scans. And that is the wrong way to go about it, because as probably was talked about earlier, you need to decide up front if a certain scan or a test is routine care or standard of care. And in this case, because sites are looking at this very closely, insurance carriers are looking at it very closely, as well as with these national coverage analyses, these things are being picked up. That when you have NCCN guidelines that say that scans should be done annually, there is no way that anybody can justify getting quarterly scans on a patient. And so we had to go back to our pharmaceutical sponsor and say, okay, since this is important for your endpoint and is only being done, to kind of to support the primary endpoint, you need to pay for these 3 extra scans a year. So that's kind of, but there have been many studies where things are being done, and I think sometimes the initial study team thought is, well, we'll see if insurance pays for it or not. But it actually needs to be, you need to decide first if this is a routine care cost or if this is a study cost. And so with the national coverage analysis, we get this nice spreadsheet from CTSU that develops them that kind of tells us if things are routine care, if they will be paid for by the sponsor, if they are a non-billable item, or M. It's kind of, they're likely to be billed to Medicare, but documentation of medical necessity is necessary. And so since the advent of this, we've had to come up with a couple of challenges or things that we had to rethink about. This is one study that Alliance initially, basically in December, I believe, activated, which is a phase 3 study of aspirin versus placebo for lymph node positive breast cancer patients. And so we activated it. Actually, it's a very lean study in terms of its data requirements. Patients are only seen every 6 months, but it did require at the first visit for a patient to have a CBC. And then after, to check the platelet count. And so we got the national coverage analysis after the study activated, and there's this first question is, does the investigational item or service fall under a Medicare benefit category? And most of our therapeutic trials, it's always yes. We never thought about this, but we got back the answer of no here. And that is because since aspirin is an over-the-counter medication, even though the dosing is a little bit different, they did not consider this to be a study that would fall under a Medicare benefit. And so that means that nothing in terms of extra blood tests or things like that, you normally wouldn't get a platelet count in a patient in this setting. That would not be billable to Medicare. And so we had to go back and revise the study schema and in the forms development, and the forms to kind of take out the platelet counts. So, that's kind of a one-off, but, it may come up in kind of studies that are run through cancer control. But other things have come up because of the national coverage analysis is tests that are being performed to determine eligibility. And some examples are maybe some of our transplant protocols, some of the FACT blood test panel, maybe a lipid panel or something else. A test that is being done for the sole purpose of determining a patient's eligibility, it probably may be flagged as a non-billable item. And these are items that you will need to get funding for from a pharmaceutical partner, if there is one. Or you may need to really question, do you need to get this test done to determine to proceed with your study? And then I think my last example is of something. So we had our Alchemist studies are currently ongoing, and they're a big initiative in our non-small cell lung cancer space in terms of precision medicine. And one of the adjuvant treatment studies was initially designed as erlotinib versus placebo for patients that carry the EGFR mutation. This study was not accruing very well. And it was not accruing well for many respects, but in discussions between the study team and NCI, we decided that we were going to make this placebo-controlled trial now an observation. And so so it seems like conceptually it's simple enough. You just go through the protocol, you scrub out placebo, you kind of, and you make it's pretty easy for the patients now. They're not going to get placebo, they're going to be erlotinib versus observation. Of course, these things take months and months of work in terms of trying to decide, well, you have patients that have already enrolled in this study. How are you going to handle their unblinding? There's lots of downstream form developments that, for placebo. The other thing that came up is that these patients were being seen monthly or every 6 weeks or so, at least initially, in order to monitor side effects, getting blood tests done to monitor side effects of erlotinib versus placebo. Now that it's an observation arm, the frequency of visits is not appropriate for the patients that are getting on the observation arm. So like all of these little small changes that you think have a lot of downstream effects, and this is where your executive officer kind of helps work with the study team and the data and stats teams to kind of hopefully have the transition be a smooth one. And so that is it.
Thank you so much. 8 years of health. It always reminds me, Dostoevsky talked about crime, that, every crime is its own unique problem. There is no general crime. There is no general protocol. Every protocol presents its own new and unique set of difficult challenges, no matter how much experience you've had. And the final group of our operations office speakers is Trini Ajazi, who is our Chief Administrative Officer for the entire group, and she's going to talk about a variety of regulatory aspects, including things that make a trial even more complicated than the normal complicated trial. The dreaded words that we hear from an investigator: I'd really like to have a partner in Europe or China or Japan. International trials, as well as regulatory trials, which you've already heard about, and some other regulatory aspects which are critical to our trial process.
All right, so today I will talk about a few things, and I would like to start off with a list of people, because this presentation is actually a team effort in terms of how we put it together. So I will discuss the conflict of interest policy for the Alliance, talk a little bit about INDs and registration trials, and then international collaborations. So Leslie Kelly is our regulatory compliance manager who oversees the COI process for Alliance. Lee G. Matthews is our pharmaceutical affairs manager, now in charge of the IND and IDE applications and management. Amy Farrell is one of our senior project managers who works closely really with the pharma partners in terms of developing our registration trials. Stacey Reeves is our senior project manager who is in charge of management and coordination of international collaborations logistics. And then, Michael Kelly and Morgan Alexander Young, are our protocol leads in the Chicago office, who know everything. So the disclosure for conflict of interest is required for those who directly or significantly affect the design, conduct, analysis, or reporting of clinical research. That means, the investigators, the study chairs, and any of our committee leadership would be required to submit a COI form to us. This COI form is an Alliance-specific COI form. It is separate from the financial disclosure form that you would submit to CTAP, which are 1572. The disclosures are reviewed by the COI, Alliance COI committee, and that COI committee then reports into the group chair and the executive committee with recommendations regarding potential COIs. The disclosure requirement is greater than $5,000 per year. You need to disclose financial interests, including travel, honoraria, any private stock, public stock ownership interest, intellectual property, and any unrestricted grants. We also do ask you to report if you have any advisory committee memberships, whether or not you have compensation. So usually, if your financial potential conflict is between $5,000 and $25,000 for private, and then $50,000 for public stock, we do allow the investigator to remain a study chair, but that would mean that there would have to be a management plan that involves, oversight by the study co-chair and a statistician, and there's obviously other group mechanisms that oversee the work of the study chair, such that that person's not solely responsible for the data. If you have a financial relationship that is more than $25,000 per year in a privately held business, or equity interest in a publicly traded company that exceeds $50,000 per year, or a 5% ownership interest, including common stock, in a privately held company, or a publicly traded business, we will prohibit you from performing the study chairship of a study. If you if you are asked to step down as study chair due to a conflict, you may retain your rights of authorship on publications derived from a study in accordance with the disclosure of conflicts of interest established by the publishing authority. If you are ineligible for a study chair or co-chair role because of conflict, you may be allowed to be on the publication, but you may not serve as the first corresponding or senior author of an Alliance publication. And we also ask that any financial conflicts be disclosed in each public presentation of research results. And my point here, and I'm not going to read you the IND regulations, I'm sure that you are all aware of what they are, I assume, and there's a lot of reading material. But an IND would be required if we need to, if we are doing investigational trials in a new indication of a drug, even if it's approved, or if it's a new drug, that it has not been approved in the US. So the INDs that we do submit are under the investigator-initiated IND umbrella. The INDs are submitted as sponsor investigator INDs by Alliance centrally. Alliance is the sponsor. Dr. Bernoulli is the principal investigator on these INDs, and we manage as I indicated, we do manage the INDs centrally through the Chicago office. In some studies, the IND may be held by NCI if they have a CRADA with the drug company. So it depends. Sometimes we hold it, sometimes NCI holds it if an IND is required. These are just the components of the IND application, Form 1571, 72, and 3674, and the components that we have to submit. The FDA has 30 days from receipt to request clarification or, basically allow you to proceed. So, there's at least a 30-day wait before we can do anything with that protocol while the FDA is reviewing it. I mean, we obviously can't activate the protocol until that review is done. And then we would submit annual progress reports on the IND. There's also this thing called the investigational device exemption. We might need it, including for some of the bioassays that we might be doing on our studies, and so that might be submitted. Sometimes we have to decide, we have to figure out, we may have to consult as to whether or not an IND or an IDE or both. So there's some, it's not always a certain thing as to how we're going to manage these IDEs and INDs. I would like to switch over to registration trials. I mean, obviously, as Olwen indicated, we do have different flavors of registration trials in terms of when a company decides that they want to file an NDA. The retrospective scenario is when they decide to file an NDA after our results have been released, and they, usually it's a supplement, it could be a supplemental NDA for a label extension of a drug that's already been approved for another indication. And then there are the prospective registration trials in which, from the beginning, the pharmaceutical company has expressed their interest in developing the trial with registration intent. And just to be clear, the NDA is filed by the pharmaceutical company. It is not filed by Alliance, even though we may hold the IND and we may have a cross-reference to the company IND. The NDA is the responsibility of the pharmaceutical partner. And this is just a slide that the staff put together that explains the application. Key issues that I would like to emphasize in conducting the, IND, actually IND and NDA studies, is that the FDA is very concerned about making sure that we are providing appropriate sponsor oversight, and that's the alliance and the study team, including the investigator, the study PI. At the site level, they're looking for the site investigator to make sure that the site investigator is providing appropriate oversight of these studies. And a lot of these issues come down to study monitoring. That includes, central monitoring, on-site monitoring, and, data reviews, and different flavors in between to make sure that we are that we are compliant with the regulations in terms of managing these studies. With other points of emphasis is the data integrity and the pharmacovigilance. Obviously, the review of serious adverse events and adverse events. We always want to make sure that we are inspection ready, because at any time when an IND and NDA situation, we may be audited by the FDA. Regulatory documentation is obviously important, in making sure that we are able to submit to the FDA the best, and solid package that we can. And, as with all clinical trials, the overall compliance with the FDA and good clinical practice guidelines are important. So these are, really the issues when we are talking with a company, with FDA, with NCI. We want to make sure that all of these things are accounted for. And obviously, we account for them for all of our trials, but there's an extra level of intensity, if you will, when we know that this study is going to be a registration trial. Investigator responsibilities include, obviously, the scientific contribution to study design. You will be asked to participate in meetings with the FDA. And then as we have to assist with the pharmaceutical collaboration. We rely on the study chairs to be timely in their role for study monitoring. That includes case evaluations of eligibility and disease outcomes, for primary endpoints. Real time and ongoing is best. You will be working closely with the stat center to make sure that these evaluations are done. We are looking more closely at protocol deviations when it's a registration trial. Obviously, safety reviews, and then the site inquiries. We want to be very timely in responding to the site inquiries for all of our studies, really. But again, extra intensity when we are looking at a registration scenario. I'm not going to go through. There's a few slides here that I know we're really behind on time, but just so these are some slides with related initiatives. So the NCI, in response to feedback from the FDA, we are putting through some initiatives that have not been part of our trials in the past. And these initiatives are aimed at creating greater monitoring efficiency, if you will, as well as regulatory compliance with requirements for an IND and NDA trial. Central monitoring is one of those, where the sites will be uploading source documents into RAVE, and we will be reviewing those centrally in the stat center. Other initiatives, we are going to institute targeted source data verification in RAVE in our audits, delegation of authority log, registration credentialing, CTAP AIRS RAVE integration. Those are all initiatives aimed at having our studies better able to comply with the requirements. I am going to move quickly through the international collaborations. There are several slides here that you can review after the meeting when you get these slides. But I do want to go through the issues and criteria for when we would consider international collaborations. You know, if we need an international collaborator, usually it's for accrual, or, you know, if we have concerns about the accrual duration, you know, especially if they're rare tumors, we might need participation from other parts of the world. On these slides are some points that the NCI has given us. When they review an international collaboration proposal, they will look at certain things. So we as a group, Alliance as a group, cannot independently decide that we will have an international collaborator. We have to ask approval from NCI. So NCI will, you know, review the necessity of an international collaborator. They'll look at past experience. You know, they may look at the country that's collaborating. You know, there might be regulatory implications and things like that that have to be considered, drug distribution, those types of issues. The NCI will require that we have a plan for auditing and monitoring in other countries. Usually we have a memorandum of understanding that we have to execute. The NCI does require that any international collaborator comply with the NCI requirements, you know, for federal-wide assurance, and then any federal regulations related to IND would have to be met. One big thing is the cost implications. How is the international collaborator or collaborators going to be funded? Do they have their own funding? Do we have to seek funding? NCI will not pay for them. So again, the next slides are just some more detail in terms of regulatory requirements. Here is they are known in the NCI as non-member collaborators, most of them. Now, some groups do have international members. Alliance has one, and that's the Swiss Oncology group. They are actually participating on a limited basis in one of our trials. And then again, these are the steps. We have to do a feasibility assessment. The Alliance Accredited Committee also has to approve a proposal for an international collaborator because we have found that it is resource intensive and it is time, you know, it's additional time for us to negotiate and coordinate and implement an international collaboration. So again, these are logistics that I'm not going to go through, but they are here for you. We do have to get State Department clearance in order for non-member international collaborators to participate in our trials. And last, the collaborating group, usually, you know, the Alliance really prefers to have the collaborator be another research group, so we don't have to collaborate you know, with individual sites in various countries. We do like to have a partner, you know, partner group if we're going to have an international collaboration. And they are required, usually the way it works is that they will have a group-specific appendix that speaks to the logistics of international participation, you know, that is different from what is in the main protocol. And there are challenges, but I think I've kind of gone through a lot of those already. And the timeline, this is something that we need to be aware of. If you are thinking that you need an international collaborator, be aware that it could take 6 to 8 months for us to get an international collaborator up and running and accruing on a trial. And that is the international team. I will take questions.